First of all, I'd like to welcome all of you. Thank you for coming to MobilizeHer 2020, Gender Justice and Voting Rights on the Ballot. So as you all know, gender justice and voting rights are on the November ballot in Oakland, Alameda County, and California. And today we're going to be discussing some key ballot propositions that will uphold Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy by advancing equity and expanding voter access for self-identified women and girls. So I'm Alicia Wu. I'm the co-director of Women's March Oakland, and I'm joined by my co-director, Allison Mata, as well as our wonderful panelists, Shahida Lacey from Black Women Organized for Political Action, Erin Armstrong from East Bay Women's Political Alliance, Maha Ibrahim from Equal Rights Advocates, Carla Dartis from Building Futures, and Jamise Myers from Schools and Communities First. So thank you all for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. We really are glad to have you here. I'd also like to thank our partners, Black Women Organized for Political Action, East Bay Women's Political Alliance, and Equal Rights Advocates for joining with us on this important webinar today. Just have a few housekeeping notes. We have a lot of material to cover today, but we are hoping to answer a couple of attendee questions at the end of each segment presenting the propositions. To submit a question, please type it into the chat box, and Allison will be looking at everyone's questions and collating them together to present to the panelists, time permitting. We will also be sharing out the contact info for the panelists and additional calls to action after the event. So you'll be able to reach out to them if you have any additional questions. And now I'd like to hand it over to Maha Ibrahim, who is counsel at Equal Rights Advocates. She is an education civil rights attorney and community lawyer liaison there, focusing on Title IX litigation and policy work. And she leads the strategic community partnerships with students, student advocates, and institutions embarking upon programmatic change. She was one of the 2 ERA attorney drafters of SB 493, California's new state-level Title IX corollary law. And additionally, she practices in Title VII and pregnancy discrimination laws. Before joining ERA, she was a US congressional and California state legislative policy staffer and field director for 8 years. She holds a JD from the University of California, Los Angeles, and a BA in Political Science and Middle Eastern Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, go Bears. She is married to a high school math teacher who is the son of a career-long early childhood education teacher mother and a history teacher district superintendent father. They have a beautiful toddler and she lives in Hayward. And Maha is going to be telling us a little bit more, sharing with us about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's legacy and how that's on the ballot this November, what the stakes are.
Thank you so much. I want to do a few shout outs. First of all, the Oakland Women's March has done something really incredible and organic. And if this is your first event that you're attending that they've put on, I mean, they all have excellent quality. They're all really organized around input and community building. And I really encourage you to keep tuning in because they just keep getting better. The other plug I want to make is I also am a proud member of East Bay Women's Political Alliance with Erin, and I've been a member of that organization for 15 years. I've seen a lot of the great work BWAP has done. So if you are attending and you're not attending because you're already a member of one of our organizations, please look into BWAPA and EBWPA. Very active. Very long, wonderful histories with intergenerational memberships, and it's a great place to be part of community. And then my last shout out will be to a wonderful UC Hastings law student who's a law clerk for ERA. Her name's Jessica Dean. I'll be quoting some Supreme Court cases and articles, and she did all of that research. So thank you, Jessica. So I'm going to start briefly with Ruth Bader Ginsburg's specific legacy and how it relates to today, and then her general legacy. Her specific legacy as to today's discussions, we know the flavor of her voting record for voting rights and affirmative action and equity, but I just want to share some quotes with you. In Shelby County versus Holder, which was a case dealing with voter protections, RBG wrote that restricting voter protections was like throwing away your umbrella in the middle of a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. In an article for the Brookings Institute on affirmative action, she wrote, "We are all losers if we neglect what others can tell us about endeavors to eradicate bias against women, minorities, and other disadvantaged groups. For irrational prejudice and rank discrimination are infectious in this world." On restoring voting rights for the formerly incarcerated, she concurred with Justice Sotomayor's dissent in Razor versus DeSantis in 2020. That case and that dissent was from a Supreme Court ruling that Florida was allowed to bar people with felony convictions from voting unless they have paid court fines and fees in full, another modern day poll tax. The dissent read in part that this court's inaction today continues a trend of condoning disenfranchisement. And in many cases involving the constitutional structure of expanding voting rights to those who have not had them before, such as youth, Justice Ginsburg educated us all and implored us. The Constitution uses the words right to vote in 5 separate places: the 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendments. And in each of these amendments, the content of that right is the same broad empowerment to enact appropriate legislation to enforce that protected right, not limit it. So that's, I think, her specific legacy with the propositions we'll all be talking about today. In general, I just wanted to make a thematic statement, which I think Women's March Oakland stands for, and so do our organizations here that we're all representing. A few days after her death, the conservative publication, The National Review, published an article with this headline: "Ruth Bader Ginsburg didn't understand her job." The article went on to infantilize us all, asserting in fact that sure, progressives thought she was cool, but she never really got what her job was as a justice. She just didn't get it. She wasn't bright enough. She wasn't sophisticated enough. She legislated from the bench. That silly woman. I don't recommend reading the article. It's not just garbage for its assertions, but it's garbage writing, a sophomoric bro's unlearned take on American jurisprudence. No research, no nuance. And besides, I think the article title tells us the true meaning of that declaration, and the content is just a distraction. After 4 years of this administration, we are more collectively used to this than we have ever been in our country's long history of dog whistle politics. We know what it means to tell white supremacists to stand by. We don't need the second town hall or the follow-up question to gain clarity. All the necessary content was right there in the first statement, up front, before all the yapping that followed. What the article conveyed was the long disappointment, discomfort, and fragility so many white hetero men and too many white women felt with RBG. RBG didn't understand her job. Her job as a white woman. Her job as a wealthy white woman with access to power. Her job to protect misogyny. She didn't get it. Her job to shelter racism and lie about Blackness. She kept failing. Her job to persecute immigrants, to deny love. She was a flunky. She didn't defer to power or tradition or men. She failed at her job to at all costs protect whiteness, maleness, straightness, inherited wealth, inherited power, intergenerational stolen property, stolen access. Ruth Bader Ginsburg just didn't get it. She just didn't get what her job was as a white woman. She wasn't a safe white woman for the men and women who seek to oppress us all. May we all fail in this way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maha, for that tribute and wonderful summary of Justice Bader Ginsburg's legacy and the stakes here that we have in November and going forward. Now we have to present California Prop 15, Janice Myers. Janice is a third-generation Californian, a Black queer woman, and campaign strategist. As political director for the Yes on 15 campaign, she works closely with a powerful and diverse coalition to build broad public support for the initiative. Previously, Janice served as campaign director and deputy director at the East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy, and recently completed 6 years of public service on the City of Oakland Planning Commission. She holds a Bachelor of Science degree in economics from St. Mary's College of California and a master's in urban and regional planning from University of California, Irvine. Jamise lives in East Oakland with a strong community of family and friends. And as I said, she'll be presenting California Prop 15, which will reform corporate property taxes to generate billions of dollars a year for schools and local services.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Alicia. It's great to be here with all of you, and thank you, Women's March Oakland, for putting this event together and for your strong support of voting rights and making sure that our folks understand what's on the ballot and all that's at stake for our kids, for our young girls, and for all of us. So thank you very much. I'm really excited to present Prop 15. It is a long time in the making. Many grassroots organizations have worked tirelessly for decades to put Prop 15 on the ballot, and it was placed on the ballot with over 1.7 million signatures gathered across the state, many from grassroots leaders and young people. So it's a very exciting moment, and there is a lot at stake, maybe more at stake than there ever has been when it comes to funding our schools and our local communities. So Prop 15 is a once-in-a-generation opportunity that we have to reverse decades of racialized disinvestment and address structural inequities in our schools and in our communities. By closing property tax loopholes in our current commercial property tax system, Prop 15 will reclaim $12 billion every single year, $12 billion every single year to use for our schools and our local communities. And it is split 40% to our school districts directly using the local control funding formula, which is an equity formula for school spending, and 60% to our cities and to our counties and to our special districts. And I don't have to tell any of you on this panel or attending this meeting how critical it is that we fund our schools and services, especially now in the midst of a public health crisis, in the midst of a climate crisis when we desperately need fire protection and maintenance, and the midst of a housing crisis, housing affordability and homelessness crisis. I want to quickly share kind of how we got here for folks that need a little bit more background on this measure. So California's property tax system has this 40-year-old loophole that has benefited a fraction of wealthy corporations and allowed them to avoid paying their fair share toward our schools and local services. And it also includes these, the loophole also includes these sort of shell games that corporations play with property so that it never reassesses when it transfers hands. And so as you can imagine, this system has robbed our communities of critical funding, and this has had a even deeper impact on communities of color and women over many decades in terms of access to services and to quality education. And so we also know that when corporations don't pay their fair share, then we are forced to shoulder more of the burden. So 40 years ago, homeowners and commercial properties actually split the tax burden pretty evenly, 55% and 45%. Now, today, 4 years later, homeowners and residential property owners pay almost 3/4 of the tax burden. And that unfair difference is felt even more deeply for low-wage workers and low-income families who are disproportionately people of color who are having to make up that difference for corporations who aren't paying their fair share. And of course, disinvestment from education and essential services to prioritize corporate profits, along with other forms of structural inequality and racism, really make up the difference in the achievement gap between women and men, between students of color and white students, and between people of color households and other households. So that's sort of how we got to this moment. Now, the opposition has raised nearly $100 million, and to be clear, the opposition is corporations who do not want to see this loophole closed and have a stake in maintaining this loophole, maintaining profits. They've raised nearly $100 million, and that means that you've seen a lot of TV ads, a lot of radio ads, you've gotten stuff in your mailboxes with lots of lies about Prop 15. And so I want to be really clear about Prop 15 right now, which is one, that it protects all residential property. So whether you're a homeowner or you rent, Your property taxes will not change because of Prop 15. All residential property is protected. Agricultural property is protected, and commercial properties that are worth less than $3 million are also exempt under Prop 15. So they're also protected. Nothing will change for those properties. There's been a lot of talk of, the impact on small businesses. As I mentioned, small businesses worth less than $3 million in property are not in any way impacted by Prop 15, and the measure actually includes a tax relief for businesses by exempting up to $500,000 of the tax they pay on equipment. So that's a benefit that all businesses will receive and will allow small businesses to reinvest in their business. So it really levels the playing field by making sure that all businesses pay their fair share. To put this into perspective, 92% of the new revenue from Prop 15 will come from the top 10% of commercial properties in the state. So we really are talking about ensuring that, the largest long-held properties pay their fair share. And Prop 15 is supported by over 1,600 organizations, unions, elected officials, businesses, educators, and youth. I'm going to name a few: the California Democratic Party, Planned Parenthood, Affiliates of California, Sierra Club California, Black Women for Wellness, ACLU, Northern and Southern California, Governor Newsom, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and Karen Bass, our very own VP candidate Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden, the California Teachers Association, and the California Federation of Teachers, along with Women March to Oakland, and almost all of Oakland, actually. All of our elected officials have gotten behind this. I'll spend my last few seconds just sharing this is truly a gender justice issue. Without public services, with public services being starved, we as women cannot get access to the care and support that we need. When our cities and counties make devastating budget cuts, our health is at risk, our safety is at risk, and certainly education justice is a gender justice issue because our students, our young women and women of color cannot get the quality education that they need in order to succeed when their schools don't have resources. So we are the 5th largest economy in the world, but we're 39th in per pupil spending in California, and that has to change in order for our communities to thrive. So thank you for the time, and happy to take any questions.
Allison, do we have any attendee questions?
Sorry, I'm on mute. No, I don't see any attendee questions, but I know we had a couple, I believe, from Women's March Oakland, correct?
Well, yeah, I think it would be great for our audience, Jimmy, specifically, if you wanted to share a little bit about the potential impact of Prop 15 on Alameda County specifically, and Oakland schools and other schools in school districts in Alameda County, what it could do for our communities.
So I'd actually like to share a link, if that's okay, with all the panelists and all attendees. I'm going to do so now. It's how much will your county benefit from Prop 15. This is a great link, whether you're in Alameda County or otherwise, to see exactly how much your community will receive. So if you click on that link, you'll see that Alameda County will receive over $600 million a year. And if you click further, you can see a breakdown to the county, to our cities, and to our school districts, and also to our special districts. And so, and our community colleges too, we can't forget about that. And so I encourage you to look through that and see the impact on your particular community. But, I think right now, in Oakland and in Alameda County, our schools have struggled for a long time in terms of making sure that our students and our teachers have the resources that they need in order to really create a thriving classroom. And we're seeing that exacerbated in COVID times, right? In distance learning, there's a huge divide in the ability to succeed through distance learning. And so we're talking about, millions of dollars to OUSD and specifically to our schools to be able to address some of those longstanding needs and those ones that are coming up now in this new COVID context. So highly encourage folks to take a look at those county breakdowns and see just how much your community can benefit.
That's a great resource. Thank you for sharing, Jamise, and thank you for sharing this important information on this critical proposition. Now we're going to move right along to talk about Prop 16, California Prop 16, and presenting that will be Shahida Lacey, representing Black Women Organized for Political Action. Shahida is a Bay Area native. She graduated from Holy Names University in 2012 and the Thomas Jefferson School of Law in 2016. She is a licensed attorney with the state of California and currently works for Alameda County Board of Supervisors, Keith Carson, as a public safety associate. Shahida has worked on criminal justice reform for the past 10 years. She advocates for policies within the criminal justice system that are fair and equitable. She joined Black Women Organized for Political Action in the summer of 2014, where she has been able to take advantage of numerous opportunities that the organization has provided. One of the goals of WAPA is to work with leaders to end mass incarceration, which is one of the reasons, which is why she joined the organization. Since joining WAPA, Shahida has worked on a landmark proposition that helps release thousands of low-level offenders. She is grateful for all the opportunities that WAPA has given her and looks forward to learn as much as she can from the great women who are in WAPA. Shahida will be telling us more about Prop 16, which would end our state ban on affirmative action.
Hi everyone. Thanks, Allison and Alicia for having me. Thanks, Women's March Oakland for having me, and I'm happy to be here today. Talking about Prop 16, I think is very interesting because it's about equity versus equality. So in California in 1996, we banned affirmative action through a proposition that basically said we want everyone to be treated equal. And then about 20 years later now, we're saying, no, we need equity, not equality. We know in California in 1995, 25% of government contracts went to people of color and women. That's over $15 billion a year went to women of color and people of color and women. Now it's a little under 5% of that, and it's way more money at this point. Prop 16 would write that. It would allow for governments to use gender preferences or race preferences when contracting. It would allow for the UC system and schools to say, no, we need actual people of color in these educational settings. It would allow for there to actually be race-based accountability when it comes to public education and public governmental agencies, which would then allow for more opportunities for people of color and women. Prop 16 doesn't necessarily have a lot of financial impacts because we already have the governmental money that we're already spending. It just would be reallocated to make it more equitable and make the people that we're contracting with, the students that go to our schools, look more like the state that we're in. And so voting yes on Prop 16 would be righting a wrong and would also be making it so that we can have equity, not just equality in the state of California. I'm happy to take any questions.
Allison, do we have any attendee questions about Prop 16?
We haven't received any. We can give everybody another minute or so to submit their questions. So just want to remind everybody who is on the webinar that you can go ahead and submit your questions if you have any on the props as they're being presented, and we'll go ahead and ask those questions to the presenters.
Shahida, if as we're waiting for some of the questions to come in, one thing that I think folks have in mind, perhaps especially folks who remember before the original ban was enacted on affirmative action, folks are thinking about quotas. And I know that Prop 16 directly addresses that potential concern of folks. Can you speak to that a little bit?
It's not necessarily about it wouldn't necessarily have quotas. Prop 16 would, one second, I have the language right here, would would not say, oh, you need this many Black people, and that it would just say if you and someone else are qualified at the same level and you happen to be a person of color and we don't have any people of color in this space, we would pick the person of color over the other qualified applicant. So it'd be well qualified, and it just evens that out.
Right. So this focus on real equity, establishing real equity, which is what we need to see across our state, and which is not being currently addressed by what we have in place right now. And certainly this ban on affirmative action that we have in place right now is making it more challenging for us to move toward that important goal. Is there anything else that you or any of the other panelists would like to add about Prop 16 to share with our attendees?
Erin, it looks like you want to add something. Just make sure you vote yes on Prop 16 on your ballots. If you're filling them out now at home, or if you're going to the polls for those 4 days that you'll be voting.
Wonderful. And we're also going to be now moving to talk about Prop 17, which would restore voting rights to Californians on parole. And Gita, you'll be sharing with us about that as well.
Yes, so Prop 17 is a ballot measure that would allow people who are currently on parole to vote. California is one of a few states that don't allow people on parole to vote, but allow people on probation to vote. I think one of 3. For most people, you don't really know the difference between probation and parole because both people tend to be out and not incarcerated. But for us legal people, we know that technically it's a person who committed a high-level felony versus a person who committed a low-level felony. But it technically would allow for 50,000 people to get their voting rights restored, because once they end their parole and they could vote, and so it's just saying once you're out of prison, you can vote. You don't have to wait arbitrary number of years of being out. You're paying your taxes. You're technically a citizen. You're a full-fledged citizen here. The only thing is that you're still on some form of supervision. But if we're allowing people who are on other forms of supervision to vote, you should still be able to vote as well. There are only 2 states in the country that allow for anyone to vote, even if they're in prison. But we're not there yet. We're gonna expand voting rights to people who are on parole and can go to the polls or get mail. And then later, hopefully, we'll be able to go for people who are in prison. If you're in jail and you haven't been convicted, you can still vote. So that would just expand the voting rights as far as we can without giving voting rights to people in prison. So vote yes on Prop 17. It would make sure that thousands of women and when people of color can actually exercise their voice and have they're already paying taxes, so they should have a voice in what we're doing and how we're spending tax dollars in this state.
Absolutely. Allison, do we have any questions?
I don't see any questions that have come in, but again, we'll give it a couple more minutes. Does anybody else, any of the panelists have any questions?
I think the lack of questions indicates that the props are just being explained really well.
Yes.
Yeah, both of the props, Prop 16 and 17, have huge, tremendous support from financial support and public official support. It appears like most people like this is a no-brainer, and many of the arguments are like, oh, those people are rapists and murderers, so they shouldn't be able to vote. Well, they're out of prison, and pretty soon we'll be able to vote in a year or 3. So what's the point? And so most people are saying it's a no-brainer. The only opposition, I think, is the Republican Party. So definitely.
Well, and it's one thing that has been pointed out is that while we're seeing, unfortunately, and very dishearteningly, a lot of efforts at voter suppression happening all around the United States in various geographic locations at various levels of government. But at the same time, we're also seeing an expansion of voting rights happening across the country. Here in California, as we can see, and we'll be continuing to discuss in the webinar here, there are many measures happening at the local level and at the state level that will actually expand voting rights. And so there's actually sort of this two-part picture that's happening. And so when I think we all feel, disheartened by what we're seeing in some places and with some efforts to suppress the vote, we are also seeing a counterbalance in these kinds of measures, which is wonderful.
Yeah, there's also I think about what happened in Florida, how Amendment 4 expanded voting rights to people who had ever committed a felony, because Florida was so insane that if you ever committed a felony, you could never vote. And so people voted for that. And then the Republican Party said, okay, well, no, you have to pay fees, which is what was mentioned earlier. And then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, oh, you do have to pay fees. So then the American people were like, okay, we'll pay the fees for them. Tell us how much and we'll give you the money. And then they said, we don't have a system to figure out how to pay the fees. So it's just like, okay, you put the barriers and we as the American people are overcoming those barriers. And I think that's amazing.
Absolutely.
There was one question that came up, and I do want to just make a note that if anybody does, any of the attendees do have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat box, and that's how we'll chat to the panelists and we'll get those questions asked. So we do have one question about Prop 17. If it passes, how many people will be impacted?
50,000.
So we're talking about restoring the right to vote to 50,000 Californians with this one proposition. Okay, so I think the stakes are clear. Everybody vote yes on Prop 17. I think we'll move right along to Prop 18, which will be presented by Erin Armstrong from East Bay Women's Political Alliance. Erin is a transgender rights advocate and local political leader in the San Francisco Bay Area. Erin was the first transgender woman to vlog on YouTube and helped found an online community providing support to thousands of members from all around the world. In 2018, Erin graduated from Mills College in Oakland with a joint MBA MPP and began working in county politics and policymaking at the Alameda County Board of Supervisors. She is passionate about criminal justice reform and gender equity and volunteers as the at-large member and vice chair of the BART Police Citizens Review Board and the chair of the East Bay Women's Political Alliance PAC. She currently lives with her wife of 11 years in the Fruitvale district of Oakland. And California Prop 18, which she'll be discussing, would allow 17-year-olds to vote in state primaries and special elections if they turn 18 before the general election.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Allison, Alicia, and Allison, and as well as Oakland Women's March for having me here today and to talk about this important proposition. As you just mentioned, Prop 18 would expand voting to 17-year-olds, but only to some 17-year-olds. And there's a little bit of a nuance here. So it's for primary and special elections where the 17-year-old would be 18 in time to vote for the general election. So just for example, if I turn 18 in August or October, what this would do is it would allow me to vote in the previous March primary. That way I had a voice when it came time to actually being able to vote in the general election. So it doesn't expand it to all 17-year-olds, just some, and it's really based on whether or not they'll be 18 by the time the general election comes around. So this has to be voted on by the public because it's actually an amendment to the state constitution. The California state legislature has already voted to approve it, and they did so with over a 2/3 majority in place to put this on the ballot. In fact, there were only 7 no votes in the state Senate. So it's fairly popular, but the main opponents is the California Republican Party, as well as, oddly enough, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. But I feel like they say no to everything. So we'll just leave it at that. There are already 19 states, as well as the District of Columbia, that already do this. And so we're not leading here. This isn't cutting edge. This is really, we're kind of the middle of the pack as far as it comes to doing this. And you know, just a couple of things for context, a little piece of bonus context here. 18 was not always the age at which you could vote. People take that for granted, but actually that came in 1971 with the 26th Amendment, which lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. So this is not the only time. This isn't something new. This is more a continuation of that enfranchisement that's so important. And similar to some of the other propositions that we've discussed today, this is really tinkering around the edges to expand that enfranchisement and expand the right to vote. The opponents of the measure unfortunately mirror a lot of the arguments around women's suffrage. They'll say things like, well, the 17-year-olds, their mind's not developed enough. They're just, you know, they don't have jobs, they don't pay taxes. And I don't know about you, but I started working at, you know, at 14, and I worked all the way through. So I was always paying taxes. So, you know, I don't buy that one too much. But then they also say that, you know, teachers and parents will just tell them how to vote. They're just gonna, you know, vote like they're told. And that was a huge argument against giving women the right to vote. Oh, they'll just vote the way their husband's gonna vote. Why would we do that? Blah, blah, blah. So we're seeing a lot of parallels in the con arguments here. So similar to so many of the measures that we're seeing and discussing today, this is really about expanding the franchise. It's about bringing people in to vote. And one of the most important things too, when you think about the rate of voting for young people, they obviously make up a huge part of the population. But the amount that they vote in, the rates that they vote are very, very low. And so their voice is just simply not heard. And part of that is because they're disenfranchised by these laws that say, oh yeah, you can't vote in the primary, but you can vote in the general. Well, then you don't really have a stake in the game, right? If you didn't have any input into shaping what the general looks like, seeing what candidates are on the ballot, then you know, you've already been disenfranchised, and why are you going to vote in the general? So this is really just expanding that. You know, at the East Bay Women's Political Alliance, we think this is a fantastic idea. It's not just about gender equity. It's really about enfranchisement for and expanding the right to vote and bringing more people, especially young people, into the fold, getting them engaged early, because we know that that's so important in making sure that their voices are heard.
Thank you, Erin. I don't think we have any questions on that one, but I think to Maha's earlier point, I think it's sort of clear what the value is and why it's so important.
Yeah, I'll comment. You know,
yeah.
Especially in this election cycle, sometimes you hear these counter arguments and you're going, what world do you live in? And I'm wondering, for those that argue that a teenager will just vote the way their parents tell them to, have you never been in an argument with a teenager? They have strong feelings and thoughts, and you know, they don't. So I wonder what world these people live in.
And I think too, just speaking a little bit more broadly about youth voting, you know, all the research says that voting patterns are often, they tend to be established when folks are very young. If people start voting at a young age, they will be lifetime voters for the most part. And, you know, this also is, I think it's a question of equity, because it gives an opportunity for folks to go through that voting exercise when they are still with their, you know, assuming if they were going to go off to college or if they're going to leave home and go off to work, this is an opportunity to still do that in that family environment or in that school environment where it can become a civic education exercise. It can become this family exercise. And, you know, that opportunity can be lost if folks are forced to wait until they're 18. I know that, you know, when people go off, if they are going off to college, it may not be super easy to vote there. That may be the last thing on folks' mind. That may not be something that's easy to do for the very first time. And doing it for the first time when one is still in high school, often still at home, is a great way to set that pattern for life. Okay, I think we'll move right along to some local measures. So the first one is Alameda County Measure W, which will be presented by Carla D'Artis of Building Futures. So Carla is a board member of Building Futures for Women and Children, which works to prevent and end homelessness for families and individuals living in the cities of Alameda, Oakland, and San Leandro. As a former first 5 state commissioner and commissioner of the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, and now a resident in the city of Oakland, Carla continues to focus on systemic changes that will improve the lives of our most vulnerable community members. Carla co-founded the Human Exploitation and Trafficking Institute with the Alameda County District Attorney Nancy, and today can be seen training and providing technical assistance to community health centers and hospital emergency departments in Alameda County in recognizing the signs of human trafficking and exploitation and responding with trauma-informed and patient-centered care. So Alameda County Measure W, which she'll be discussing, establishes an additional 0.5% county sales tax to fund programs for people without housing.
You're muted.
Carla, you're on mute right now.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I actually tried to unmute myself, but I'm glad you did it as the administrator. So I was actually giving praise and thanks to you all because it's really a joy to be part of such a smart, progressive, fierce panel of women and leaders that are just really going to the heart of the inequities and the injustices and the insults that we just continue to receive, and we fight through them. So I want to make a little correction and really make sure you guys understand what Measure W is. So thank you from my heart to yours. Thank you. So Measure W actually provides a dedicated source of revenues for a period of 10 years. And what it is it's a 0.5 cent increase to the sales tax. So we currently pay a sales tax of 9.25%. This measure raises that to 9.75%. That is then estimated to generate $150 million a year for the next 10 years. Those resources are really restricted to help address the underlying issues that cause people to lose their housing, that cause people to continually face housing insecurity, food insecurity. What do I mean by that? So this measure would fund substance abuse programs, mental health treatment programs, underemployment through training applications and job development for families, for veterans. This actually provides a much more streamlined and flexible rental assistance subsidy to families that are on the verge of losing their housing. Right now in Alameda County, that rental assistance subsidy is actually funded by the U.S. Department of HUD. And then we have little smaller pots that private philanthropy has amassed, or in some respects, the health community service agencies, but it doesn't go far enough. So when Measure W was developed with the full endorsement of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors and a consortium of extraordinary leaders that's providing direct shelter services and residential services and programs, when it was put together, the notion was, let's not build something that we know won't work. Instead, let's model it after a stream and a process that we have seen to be quite successful. So to the point that was raised about another proposition of saying, this is not unprecedented. We have a system like this in the city of San Francisco, so San Francisco County and City, and we also have this in Los Angeles County. And I'm a former resident of LA County, and their numbers are crazy, right? So while LA County may have between 40 and 60,000 people on their millions and millions and millions of residents, here in Alameda County, homeless numbers are anywhere from 15,000 to 8,500. That's what they are. And the reason why they're all mushy, right? Because we have different ways of how we're defining housing. And so I can be considered as housed if I'm just couch surfing, And that is still the issue of you're being unhoused, you're not supported. So what this would do is, again, dedicated streams of revenue. Now, why is it important? Because in 1918, we as voters in Alameda County, we approved bond measures under A1 that actually has generated thousands of brick and mortar, thousands of units of housing. But what we don't have is the companion piece around residential services. And again, the services that would keep you in that housing and actually buttress and support the other streams of social service dollars or human capital investment dollars that, to be quite honest, until we move money from the 1% down to the rest of us, we're just eating our seed corn, right? So this is to try to actually generate dollars that would supplement that. Now, I don't know about you, but accountability matters a lot to me, right? So the other piece to this is that there is an oversight council that is comprised of residents, formerly homeless folks, as well as nonprofit community-based service providers, governmental agencies. So here's an oversight council and committee that works with a county agency to be determined where these dollars will float through. Now, one might say, well, okay, you generate $150 million. So is the majority of those funds going to be used in the administration of the resources? No, they will not. And so that's the good thing. So it's around leveraging a platform that we have already around funding distribution so that at least 90 to 95% of the funds that are generated go where they need to go, which is in real direct services to mitigate homelessness, right? The last thing I want to say is this. So I don't have dandruff, but as you can see, I have nappy hair. And my hair got even nappier when I really came to understand, which I believe is a truth all across the state, which is when you look at who's homeless in Alameda County, 82% of who is homeless are people that were formerly housed. So clearly it's saying that our systems are broken to keep people in their housing, and that more resources and competently skilled people and better partnerships around the use and the investment of those resources is absolutely needed. So my hair has gotten even nappier when I came to understand that. And I really do ask you to vote yes on Measure W, and that you will be part of the greater call to action, which is to actually throw your name in the hopper that's around looking at this oversight committee. Because as we've been talking about, this is about enfranchising us all in this fight. I will leave it at that and take questions. Again, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Carla. I don't think we have any questions. Again, I think it's an example of something that, makes a ton of sense to folks, given the challenges around housing and how critical an issue it is. So did any of the other panelists want to add anything regarding this measure?
So I just want to say I had an opportunity to sit on the policy panel for Measure W as it was being developed, and was just really impressed by the broad coalition that was brought together to create this policy, as well as the incredible amount of research that really went into driving it. There was an entire systems modeling process that went on that really showed what our entire system looks like as it relates to homeless services in Alameda County. Incredibly comprehensive. And all of that came together at a table with policy experts, with community leaders, with homeless advocates, and with people with lived experience to bring forward this measure. And so it's so wonderful for me, at least, to see it reached the ballot, and I'm just so hopeful that we can really put the votes behind it that it needs to get it across the threshold, because these are much needed services that are just so crucial to really addressing the homeless crisis that we've been in for far too long.
Absolutely. I just want to thank you for lifting that up. And I'm so glad that you were part of that process. And some of those colleagues that Erin is referencing, include folks from East Bay Asian Local Development Corporation, Eden Housing, Faith in Action, Bay Area Rising, Bay Rising Action, Abode, Alameda County Democratic Party. The list of endorsers is quite impressive, and it's really come from an informed perspective of actually having provided services, having gone to battle to try to make bureaucratic systems work, to really come to the recognition that you need a more flexible pot of dollars that can partner well with resources. So again, thank you, and vote yes on Measure W.
Carla, we did have one question, which was, can you tell all the attendees, is it a 2/3 vote that is required, 2/3 of voters to approve this measure for it to pass?
I don't think we have that requirement of 2/3. It's just a majority rule.
That's correct. It's a general tax, 50% plus one will get us there.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will move along to our final measure for this webinar, which will be presented by Maha. So this is an Oakland specific measure, Measure QQ, which would authorize the Oakland City Council to allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote for the office of school board director.
Yeah, so I'll open by saying Equal Rights Advocates isn't a political organization. We're a nonprofit legal organization. So I haven't worked on this measure. But what I'd like to share with you today is obviously the arguments why this is really good and you should vote yes. I suspect based on the amount of questions we've gotten that you may already be inclined to vote yes. So I encourage you then to think about what we've all said today as possible talking points for yourselves, because I'm guessing that people who take time out of their Saturdays to really figure out their ballot and attend these sorts of things are the same people that their families and friends and neighbors turn to ask about their ballots. So I hope we're able, and I'm able with Measure QQ, to give you some more fodder for your rich discussions in this really important election season. So a little bit about ERA so you can understand the work we do with youth. We're a nonprofit legal organization. We litigate, but we also write policy. And we also just go out in the community and try to be not the lawyers at the front of the room, but the lawyers in the back of the room, so that we're backing up the people that know what they need and know what they want and have lived those experiences. And we're there to give them the legal representation or interpretation or just presence that they need to keep things going in their own movement. And one of the great privileges of my time as an attorney at ERA that I've had was to work directly with OUSD girls, women and girls of color. About 4 years ago, we began working with those students to revitalize their sexual harassment and assault policies and their gender equity policies. And I want to tell you how that came about a bit, because I think it tells us a bit about Measure QQ. That came about not because we went in, we adults, and it wasn't just ERA. There was Alliance for Girls, there was Missy, there was a lot of great community organizations. We didn't go in and say, you know what Oakland needs? A revised sexual harassment and assault policy. Instead, we went in and said, and we had a professional organization that knows how to take surveys and do focus groups. We said, why is the truancy rate so high among Black girls per their population? What's happening here? And they asked the girls, and the answer was, school isn't safe for me. I'm getting harassed. I'm getting catcalled. I'm getting assaulted. And the adults don't know what to do at best, or refuse to do anything at worst. And when I stand up for myself, they expel me. They punish me. I'm the loud Black girl. And so that's what informed the work we did there. It was going to them first, right? And I think Measure QQ really, really says that we believe what it is we preach, right? As Oaklanders and as progressives and as all the things we are in our various communities. What QQ does is it lowers the voting age to 16 for for the District Board of Education, which has 7 members. And we know that a lot of us know the history. OUSD has been fraught. It's one of the most amazing urban giant school districts that has some really cutting edge approaches, some amazing educators, and really rich history. At the same time, it's struggled. It's gone into receivership. There's, we've had different ebbs and tides of leadership there that at some points have been inspiring and at some points have been scandalous. And what Measure QQ does is it says students deserve to have a voice in who's leading their school district. Not just because it's the right thing to do or it's the progressive thing to do, but because they know best. We trust them. And so it lowers that voting age to 16 for the Oakland School Board Board of Directors. It would amend the Oakland City Charter to allow that voting. This would give approximately 8,000 additional Oakland citizens the right to vote. They would have to be United States citizens and residents of Oakland to vote. And it would extend that voting right to 16 and 17-year-olds. And there would be a system to keep separate voting rolls for them. And that's a system we already have. So this isn't going to be very expensive. We have a system that separates out groups that are permitted to vote for certain things, but not other things. So it would just be part of that sort of split voter roll system. The measure was placed on the ballot by a unanimous vote of the City Council. So there's already been some recognition of the importance of this. And it's a 50% measure. So we need 50% plus 1. As Erin talked about in her presentation, this kind of stuff isn't new. There's 18 states and the District of Columbia that allow 17-year-olds to vote in primaries in which they will be 18 by the time of the general election. There's no constitutional conflict. I quoted Ruth Bader Ginsburg earlier, who told us, the only thing the Constitution really says after we got rid of that, not all humans are human bullshit, is here's how you can expand voting rights. So the Constitution doesn't prevent states or municipalities from establishing a lower voting age. And the California Constitution allows charter cities like Oakland to pass laws in areas of local concern like this, such as school board elections. And it's also not a new reform to our area. Berkeley lowered its voting age for school board races to 16 already. And San Francisco is considering it right now. Same thing, lowering it to 16. Again, Erin alluded to it. It's part of a broader movement to increase voter turnout and engage younger people in the lifelong habit of voting. As Alicia pointed out, 18 is a time of transition. 16 is a time of being around at least some familiarity. And as I was researching QQ, something that I found very interesting was that when younger people vote, it actually gets older people in their lives to vote that haven't been voting. So they increase voter turnout of their family, of their community, of their neighbors by their engagement and enfranchisement. So we know it'll give us 8,000 new voters in the population that's directly addressed by this bill, but it could expand to their communities. And the other thing we know about OUSD is the school population of OUSD, the student population, is actually more diverse than the general population of Oakland. If you ask yourself, how can that be? One answer is private schools for the wealthy. And another answer is multiracial families with multiple children and one parent's white. So you actually end up with more children of color than the 2 representative parents, right? So, and we've got adoptive families, we've got foster youth, so there's a lot of richness in the OUSD school district that can be better represented by allowing those folks to vote, those kids to vote. And, I think also an additional argument for youth vote is that it gives youth a chance to analyze for themselves. And we already know their minds are developed for logic and reasoning at 16. We expect it of them in their homework and their classes. So any of these derisive, infantilizing arguments are, really quite offensive. But it also gives them an opportunity to test a theory that they and their parents and their grandparents may have no reason to believe, based on the fraught history of voter disenfranchisement and and polling abuse in this country, which is that your vote can immediately improve the quality of your own life, that it's not abstract. And so to get a start in voting in something so direct to your lived experience as your board of directors can be very, just a very monumental opportunity for our youth. I want to say, one thing about that work with OUSD is not only did we get to learn from their experience, and the students really led that work, which is now, that policy now is the gold standard policy in the nation. I've got schools calling us from New York, asking us how Oakland did it. Okay, and I mean, that's really, it's really something. Everybody's heard about it. Schools are curious about it. And, and the answer is they call ERA and they say, do you have a toolkit you can share? And I say, no, you got to get in a room with your students and listen to them. This isn't like a piece of paper I can send you and you're just going to, make a macro template out of it. It was 2 years of working with students, but those students showed up to board meetings. They spoke, and even the ones that they aren't the kind to speak up in a board meeting, they were the ones having the really, substantive discussions with their peers ahead of the board meeting to decide what to say, right? And so I'll leave on my, my support of QQ. And again, I'm not an organizer of it or a campaigner for it, but I have the privilege and honor of having worked with Oakland youth, and I'm telling you, they deserve this right. Is this. There's a trend in progressive spaces and organizations to pontificate on exactly what I've been sharing, which is our duty to listen to youth and follow their lead, learn from their lived experience. But we have to really ask ourselves, if we're ever truly doing that, if we're ever being honest with them or us, if we insist on retaining our right to veto their voice. And I think when you're looking at giving students the right to vote on their own school board elections, that's what we're saying. Are we telling them they have to keep going into those school board rooms and basically begging the parent to give them the permission to have the rights and the services, the counselors, the foster care services, the reading programs, the immigrant enrichment and support programs that OUSD needs and that these students know they need in their classrooms to support what the students identify as their best and most committed teachers? If we say we're creating a space only where you can talk, but in the end I can veto. So I think we really need to look at our own selves and our intellectual honesty there, and think of Measure QQ as a way to not just unleash ourselves from the limitations of our imagination that might be impressed upon us from the institutions we've inherited, but really think about how honest we're being with the youth that we're asking so much of in so many other spaces. So that's my pitch for QQ. I hope you came into this event already voting yes. If not, I hope you're voting yes now and you're going to tell your friends and neighbors about it.
Thank you, Maha. I don't think we have any questions about that specific measure. I guess I just wanted to take this opportunity to see if any of the panelists had anything else that they would like to say to attendees before we wrap up on any of these measures or anything else regarding sort of the stakes upcoming in November here. Okay, well, I just want to thank all of our panelists for your wonderful expertise and insights today. All of the attendees for taking time on your Saturday to come to our webinar. As I had mentioned at the beginning, we will be following up with contact info for our panelists, as well as additional calls to action for all of you who've attended so that you can take your involvement from today and continue forward with that as we move toward November 3rd. One other thing that I wanted to mention, an additional opportunity today, is that Women's March Oakland is going to be participating, doing a phone bank for Prop 15. It will be starting at 1:30 p.m., so in about 20 minutes. If you are interested and have not already signed up, please email us, contact at womensmarchoakland.org, and we will make sure to get you signed up for the phone bank. And I think we have one small thing to share. Maha wanted to share something else with the attendees. Go ahead, Maha.
Sorry to abuse the opportunity, but I just wanted to say East Bay Women's Political Alliance is going to be posting some things on our website ahead of the election, and we're looking to organize a small event after the election. We're not going to host a watch party, but we wanted to host a self-care space focused on the election. God knows if we don't get what we need out of this election, God help us all. And we wanted to make a space to come together. And if we do get what we need out of this election, first of all, we need to acknowledge it might not be what everybody needs. We know it's imperfect, but that's what we're dealing with. And second, even if it's exactly what you want and you get the candidates you want, we know that 4 years of this kind of trauma and loss, loss of our rights and loss of our dignity and loss of a lot of things, you don't just shake that off with an election. And there's going to be that moment of exhaling that could be very painful. So I just wanted to give a plug to keep an eye out for that. We'd love to be in community with you.
Great, thank you, Maha. Thank you all again. If you'd like to join the phone bank, please reach out, and everyone vote yes on all these important propositions, and tell your friends. Maha, I think made a great point there. Tell your friends, tell your family, your neighbors, your coworkers. Make sure everyone's educated. Some of these propositions are doing really well. Some of them are still facing some pretty well-funded opposition, and they're very important. So get out there and spread the word. Thank you so much.
Thank you.